You're watching the Braver Angels podcast, the new way of talking politics. I'm your host, John Wood Jr. Okay, folks, I am joined by one of the cutting edge leaders in the bridge building movement, the bridge building field. You know, there are a lot of folks doing this kind of work. I'm not sure we're all agreed as to what the name of it is, but the one thing that we all have in common is that we are fighting for a more humane American democracy, one that works in which we treat each other well as human beings, even when we interact across the divide. Ladies and gentlemen, Manu Meel.
John, you set up a very difficult standard that I will now try to meet for the rest of the podcast. It is amazing to be here, and I just have to say that the work that you've done with Braver Angels, the work that Braver Angels done across the country has not only been inspiring, but as a young person, 23 years old, it serves as a model for me to emulate. So thank you, and thanks for letting me barge in.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Yeah, Manu, you were in town today. We decided to get together, do a little bit of a work share sort of thing, and basically just been taking you back and forth to my different work locations, including this studio, where folks who are used to getting on Zoom calls with me will see me talking to them against the backdrop of all sorts of cords and recording devices and a voiceover room that kind of looks like it could be a CIA black site or something like that.
I did think you were up to something weird, but but now now that I know the real John Wood Jr., it is amazing to be here, man. And I have to say that you spent most of the day with me today. As I was joking earlier at Strive, which is an amazing school that you're working at in LA, that John was basically having a great day, and so I decided to show up and make it worse. And so I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, man, me too.
Yeah.
Well, I should have said up top that, of course, you are the CEO of an extraordinary group called BridgeUSA, which is a campus-based organization across America working on the issue of political polarization. And, of course, Braver Angels and BridgeUSA have a deep and long-standing relationship at this point. But tell us a little bit, first of all, about Bridge. One thing I'll just say about it very quickly is the fact that in a larger sort of universe of political bridge building that I think is generally occupied by people who are a little bit older. I mean, even I'm a little bit young in comparison to, I think, a lot of our peers in sort of the bridge building world. Bridge USA is without a doubt sort of, the Gen Z vanguard of the larger sort of bridging or depolarization movement. But how do you describe Bridge USA?
So BridgeUSA is the largest and fastest growing student movement in the country trying to change how we talk politics. But before I get into the actual work of BridgeUSA, I want to tell you why I got started.
Yeah.
Because I think the power of why is especially important in this country where everyone is looking for some sort of purpose. Today's an accident. I never had any interest in politics. I actually have less of an interest in politics working for it in the past 4 years. I started off as a pre-med major at UC Berkeley. I distinctly remember I'd written in my UC Berkeley statement that I want to be at a place that is at the nexus of history. And lo and behold, the second semester of my freshman year, I show up to campus, I'm walking back from a math seminar, and I hear helicopters flying overhead, and I hear windows shattering in the distance. Now, Berkeley is a great relationship with protests. We protest everything. We protest small things, big things. We'll sort of always be pushing the bounds. But that day was actually the second largest free speech protest in the history of Berkeley since the 1960s free speech protests. It was over a speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos that came to campus, who's a right-wing provocateur who's fallen off the map a little bit. The next day, me and a couple of random people who are now some of the best friends that I have got together and we said, the campus community is hurting. Now, remember, I was into medicine. I have no interest in the actual political arc of Bridge at that point. It was purely, let's get people to understand each other. That space, a lot of people showed up. We kept holding that space. And then we turned into a club. We had amazing people who had already built this thing called Bridge Notre Dame, Bridge Colorado Boulder. So we said, there's a real desire for young people to be on campuses where they have the opportunity to challenge their minds, to push forward the bounds of what they know, and importantly, to have spaces of understanding. That's how we got started. And from then, we graduated, we took this work full time, and for me, I'm married to the problem of trying to understand how we not necessarily bring America together, but how we get people within America to better understand each other.
Right. Yeah. Indeed. Well, we should offer our thanks to Milo Yiannopoulos for set the stage.
It's the one good thing he's done in my life.
Milo, we'd love to have you on the Braver Angels podcast for a conversation.
I don't think he's around anymore, but We'll see.
He was a colorful personality, and actually, it is interesting to talk about him for a moment because I remember when he was the sort of the face in some sense of the kind of sort of the fashionable, charismatic kind of people called him alt right, and he sort of embraced the label. I don't know that it was ever an accurate description of him. But there's been this contest on, in American politics, and he's not even American, but there's this contest in American politics for a long time over the energy of young people, if you will, right? To have a movement that it's able to sort of gain stream and charge through the popular imagination, you need to be able to engage young folks. And Milo was looked at as sort of, from a certain vantage point, as sort of a trendsetter in this direction, because you want people with their finger on the pulse, their finger on the culture. And above a certain age, for folks who weren't raised with social media, with folks who weren't raised in the sort of multimedia kind of landscape that millennials, and particularly even more so Gen Z, have been raised in, I think a lot of folks feel like just the way you've got to find a millennial to be your tech support if you've got to,
Yeah.
if you want to figure out how to work your new your new smartphone, so too do you need to be able to tap into the energy of young people to be able to push something that can shift the culture in a deep sort of way. How do you look at BridgeUSA and the student movement as ultimately bringing something to the larger conversation over depolarization that maybe isn't going to be as quickly supplied if we're just relying on baby boomers to sort of, fill the gaps for us?
It's a great question. So I want to take a quick step back and think about what is the mindset of someone that is Gen Z? What is the mindset of someone that is 23, 22, 20, 19, 18? Someone my age has grown up with 4 major events that have defined our lived political memory. 9/11 was when we were born.
And how old are you again for
I'm
people
23.
watching?
I'm
Okay.
23.
Yeah.
So 9/11 was when we were born. We went to middle school with the 2008 recession. We graduated high school with the 2016 election, and we graduated college with the year that was 2020, the pandemic, the Capitol riots. Not a great sample size of democratic progress, to say the least.
Yeah. It's amazing. I'm 35 years old. I'm used to usually being kind of the young guy, in the room.
Yep.
So talking to you is always very sort of refreshing in terms of kind of like table setting my own experience.
To make you feel better, John, there's a quote that Robert F. Kennedy once said, which is that youth is not a time of life, it's a stage of mind.
That's right.
So you're also young.
There's
a lot of old young people and a lot of young old people.
No, that's for sure.
I have to say that given that mindset, most people my age, conservative, liberal, red, blue, Trump, Biden, everyone wants some sort of change. No one is satisfied with the status quo.
Yeah.
And why do I bring that up? Because young people are looking for a theory of change. They're looking for a way for the status quo to be disturbed, to be disrupted. And thus far, bridge building has often seemed like a preservation of the status quo.
Right.
It's perceived as depolarization work is perceived as a defense of the status quo. And so with our movement and our work, our market, quote unquote, the audience that we're going after is an audience that wants change. So the biggest contribution that I think BridgeUSA has, beyond the fact that it's scaled a grassroots infrastructure that's pretty unprecedented in terms of college campuses and high schools, is that we've figured out how to couch this work in the context of change, in the context of urgency, in the context of a recognition that anyone can actually participate in this theory of change, that it's not just for those that can afford to wait for change.
Right.
And this is especially relevant with what's happening in the news in the last 2-3 weeks with Roe v. Wade, with shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, in Laguna Woods, California. People want change. So how does this work respond to change? That's our biggest contribution.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to get into a little bit of that if you'd like.
Yeah, I would love you to, because I think that you put your thumb on something that's absolutely vital, right? I think that we really are involved in the work of building a movement. And yet, because it's movement building with people who are coming together from across ideological starting points, I think that what you have is generally a shared recognition of the fact that the fabric of democracy is fraying, institutions are losing credibility with the American people, seeming perhaps to sort of teeter or crumble in their effectiveness, right? But that doesn't mean that people are really agreed entirely on the change that they want to see in American society beyond the understanding of the fact that we can't just continue hating each other to the point of our sort of using the rules of
Hmm.
society to sort of beat each other into political oblivion.
Can I
It,
pick on something you said right there,
yeah.
which is that, and I think it's very smart, is that people want different types of change. That
Hmm.
there isn't. So when I say change, I don't mean change in a progressive sense.
Hmm.
What I mean, to your point, is going backwards is also change.
Hmm.
In
Right.
the way that some people talk about in the context of MAGA, let's say.
Hmm.
So I'm not here to litigate change. I'm not here to litigate the ideology that we need to achieve change.
Right.
And I think you and the rest of us that are doing this work are here to litigate what theory of change,
Hmm.
the how. That's what
Hmm.
we're
Right.
litigating.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the battle we're fighting.
I think that that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so expound upon that and this observation that you've rendered, which says that the younger folks involved in this movement, in particular, are able to sort of frame this work in a way that doesn't simply look at it as a project to maintain the status quo, but is comfortable, sort of being heavily kind of reform minded, perhaps, and still being committed to the need for us to build these civic bridges.
Hmm. So I'll actually connect it to what happened the other day, which was the tragic, and very sad shooting in Uvalde, Texas.
Mhm.
The immediate response to that shooting is that we want action, right? Everyone agrees on that. I've seen conservative leaders, Democratic leaders, liberal leaders, everyone says that what happened was not only unacceptable, but there needs to be some sort of action.
Right.
The disagreement is on the type of action. The question now becomes, how do we compel society and policymakers to achieve that action?
Mhm.
So there's two strategies here, two ways to go about this. The first is what we've been doing for the last 10 years, what the Democrats have been doing, which is that we need to hold what they would say are Republican lawmakers who are inactive on this issue accountable. That
Mhm.
we need to vote them out of office and that we need to practice a politics of pure exclusion so that our side is empowered to be able to pass these very important reforms.
Right.
Now, on a personal level, I might agree with a lot of those reforms. The fact is that Sandy Hook happened 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And the resistance to gun control has only hardened.
Sure. Right.
That makes me question that theory of change.
Mhm.
And now there's an alternative model, an alternative vision, a new way to think about how you are reflecting on the current moment. And that is, let's have a good faith conversation about why certain folks feel very strongly about guns, why certain folks feel very strongly about things like AR buyback programs.
Mhm.
And let's all appear at that table with a real desire to act.
Mhm.
As long as everyone is showing a good faith effort to act and everyone believes that inaction is not possible, let me listen to you and try to have some sort of piecemeal action.
Mhm.
That is an example of what bridge building is as opposed to a model of pure partisan activism.
Mhm.
And what I would argue is that on almost every policy issue that progressives have been fighting for, whether it's climate change, whether it's gun control, whether it's voting rights, the opposition is only hardened. And now it's not only their fault. There's a reason why that opposition's hardened. But I would argue that the way that we're trying to move society forward is one in which that politics of exclusion is hitting a wall.
Mhm.
And as Newton said, to every force, there's an opposite and equal reaction.
Right. Mhm.
And we are at an untenable point in our society where we can't continue to produce actions that produce equal and opposite reactions.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a person who, on balance, I mean, I think I've got a sort of a heterodox spread of views. But I think, if you were to characterize me as right of center, I wouldn't disagree with that, right? And I'm somebody who thinks that, when it comes to issues of poverty and education, that civil society and sort of, prudently regulated markets are kind of the starting point from which I would see a lot of progress being sort of ushered in, but that, conservatives, to your point about liberals and Democrats, have failed to sort of win the actual, genuine sort of uh, credibility and interest from a wider cross section of Americans, sufficient to allow sort of Republican political points of view to be viable in much of the mainstream, because I think that we have sought an exclusionary way of sort of, engaging the discourse, which then leaves, I think Republicans in particular sort of needing to figure out, okay, with a sort of a shrinking sort of share of the larger electorate, how do we hold on to power and how can we work with, gerrymandering and other sorts of, reforms to figure out, losing popular elections time and, general elections time after time again in terms of the popular vote, how can we sort of get the system to work in a way that allows us to kind of, stay in power? And so, I would make a similar sort of utilitarian point from the other side of that. I think both sides would be wise to sort of, figure out how to authentically engage the other so that they can win the trust of the American people, broadly speaking. Now, when you set it up that way, though, what seems to be a fairly simple and obvious point about inviting people to the conversation in a way that engenders trust so that you can possibly change minds. Forgive me, folks who are watching. I just got a new iPhone. I'm a former Android
John,
user.
welcome to the dark side. Just so you
I'm
know,
gonna break the fourth wall here real quick because I'm trying to figure out how, and we're not even gonna edit this out of the discussion, Manu. Because
here, John, give me your phone.
Can
Look,
you-
as a young person,
I
I'm sorry.
I need tech support,
This is a great example.
both because he's Gen Z and also because he's Indian. And, I will go there. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dad. I did pursue a career in engineering. You know what's funny is I was just teasing John about this, that our politics are so binary right now that I'm sorry, but I really deeply dislike Android users. Your propensity to make group chat suddenly green, and that's the real binary we need to have. Sorry.
I was that guy, and now I've come over to the dark side. I was a reluctant convert, but I succumbed to popular.
There's only a few binaries that we actually think should exist.
I'm ashamed to say that I flip-flopped on the phone. But the thing is that it does take us back to the tension of, well, isn't this a status quo movement? Because if we're offering a perspective to each side saying, hey, you guys would be better at politics if you were engaging people in good faith and building trust, I can imagine people saying, well, that means that this only works if we come to a compromise on things, right? Now, I would argue that politics should be considered, the art of compromise in a real way. And yet, you might have some issues that are sort of relatively zero sum. I mean, we can think of compromise positions on abortion, for instance, but ultimately, if you're somebody who believes that a woman's right to bodily autonomy should be absolute, versus somebody who believes that the life of an unborn fetus or child to life should be absolute, if there's not always a ready compromise sort of available, a place to meet in the middle that leaves both sides feeling satisfied, does it mean that the work that we're doing is incapable of bearing any fruit on issues like that? Or is there a way of conceiving success in this work that doesn't necessarily require moderation in terms of compromise and political outcomes?
Yeah. I want to say two things to that before I even actually answer the meat of the question. The first is that the notion that we have to be ends-based is, I think, part of the problem.
Yeah.
We're in a society right now where the immediate question is, what is the policy, what is the outcome, what is the tangible objective that we need to pass to solve this person's pain in the inner city or this farmer's pain in their inability to grow their crops in Kansas?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that matters. And yes, it sounds like because I'm not in that position, I can ask us to wait for that tangible outcome. But the problem right now is that the process by which we achieve that policy outcome is not at all in good faith. And the other problem is that we are currently at a moment where every policy solution we pass or propose is sitting on a seesaw that swings back the other direction the moment the other party gets in power. That is a recipe for perpetual mistrust with the American people.
Right. Yeah.
The second thing is that I would actually say that the jump to compromise and the question of how we can actually judge the success of this work begs a much deeper question, and that is that right now the conditions for change, the conditions for policy action, the conditions for bipartisanship, the conditions for compromise do not exist. And here's what I mean by that. You cannot have a democracy if you can't talk to each other. It is that simple to me.
Right.
When I was in that on campus and I saw those protests and I saw the anger, the sadness, the vitriol, the fear that students were operating with, that is a deep societal rot that cannot be addressed by policy. It has to be addressed by the virtues, the bonds, and the trust that we build within each other.
Mhm.
Last thing I'll say on this: in the last 10 days, we had a race-motivated shooting in Buffalo where African American patrons were shot. We had a shooting in Laguna Woods, California, where Taiwanese Americans were shot. We had the other day kids being gunned down by a murderer in Uvalde, Texas.
Hmm.
And last year, we had 5 million new Americans that were not gun owners buy guns.
Right.
Why would someone buy a gun, John, that isn't trained, that isn't interested, or that isn't already a hunter? It's
Mhm.
because they're scared for the life and they might have to think that they have to kill someone.
Right. Yeah. Mhm.
There's not a policy that will fix that.
Mhm.
Because as Tocqueville said, democracy in America is about the most core voluntary political associations where people have trust. They listen to each other. And so when someone says that what I'm doing and what you're doing and what the rest of us doing is hokey pokey, I would say that the amount of hate that I'm about to get for saying that
Mhm.
is definitionally the reason why we are doing one of the most boldest things that America has not only needs, but it is what it has been built on.
Well, and as Dave Chappelle said, the Second Amendment comes second for a reason. You've got the Second Amendment just in case the First Amendment doesn't work out. And so I think that we're here
I
trying
mean,
to make sure that the First Amendment does in fact work out, right?
the First
And,
Amendment works, and and people feel like they can actually participate in the conversation.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, look, we could get into a conversation over, the limits of free speech, should there be cancel culture, this, that, or the other, but just to keep it grounded on just the point that you're making. The thing it seems to me that we have to be able to convince people of, and that I hope people listening to us really take into account for anybody who has any sort of, doubt or skepticism on this front, is the fact that in the absence of not just communication, because on a certain level we're communicating all over the place, right? If we're shouting at each other and screaming at each other, and cable news and social media, so on and so forth, there's all sorts of toxic ways in which we're communicating, right? But in the absence of good faith communication leading to a deeper level of trust between people, and what I mean by trust is sort of interpersonal, intentions. Like, I don't have to necessarily trust that you're right on all of the political arguments that you're making for me to trust that. But at the end of the day, I think that, Manu wants what's best for me, and therefore I want what's best for him, right? As fellow Americans, as neighbors, and people have to share a country together, and whose children will have to share a country together, right? In the absence of that basic level of intergroup and interpersonal trust, every single institution and every single venue and context of American life just becomes another battleground for us to undermine one another, right? And so, whether it's using the media to distort the positions of the other side for political advantage, whether it's tinkering with the way we interact with the courts so as to give our political side an advantage in being able to interpret the law, if it's fiddling with the way in which we elect people or making claims about the electoral system that may be at odds with reality, but give us the opportunity. And, this could be true in any number of directions, by the way, give us an opportunity to sort of use trust or distrust in the electoral system as a means of delegitimizing, the other party, the other political candidates. What you have is a situation in which institutions can't serve their purpose,
Yeah.
And so while everybody is rushing to try and figure out gun control, climate change, immigration, any other number of things, the tools that we have at our disposal, the institutions and the mechanisms of our democracy to address these things are themselves becoming rusted because we forget that human beings in relationship with each other are themselves, the key ingredients
Yep.
that make all of this work. And so I guess the question for you is, you know, do you see this basic understanding as being one that's sort of hard for people to grasp on some level? Why don't we get this already in a way that would center it in the mainstream conversation? Why is it taking you and me and some other, scrappy folks, to try and remind people of something that I think most of us would agree is pretty fundamental?
Because it's much easier to get people rallied around a tangible policy action item.
Mm,
It
right.
is much easier for us to rally for the Green New Deal, and it is much more difficult for us to rally behind a process.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what we're fighting is a battle of temperament. We're not telling people that we're fighting for lower taxes. We're telling people this is how we need to think. That is a difficult task. I want to step back for a second because you said, why aren't we got to solve climate change, we got to solve gun control, all the different issues that people are, passionate on the left and the right, community, faith, the crisis of religion. The fact is that imagine you're a firefighter and you see the fire and we got to extinguish this fire, but you don't have a hose to fight the fire with. But we got to fight the fire, John.
Right.
We got to fight the fire. And what we're saying is, hold on, how are you going to fight the fire? Right? It's a question of what are the two. There's two theories of change again. There's two types of hoses we've got. We've got a squirt gun that feels great and you can shoot it really quickly, but it does nothing in the long run to extinguish that fire.
Right.
Or you can work a little bit harder, walk down the mile, and get a water hose and hook it up to a fire hydrant and extinguish that fire. And I'll do even one better. You'd probably get a couple of the other firefighters that are in the other towns with you, because you're built on a notion of empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
The fact is that, I don't mean to trivialize the importance of policy change, but we've built the society too complex and have forgotten, to your point, the simplest fact, and that is that the core unit of a democracy, of a society, is the person. And if the person is not empathetic, if people are closed-minded, if people are mistrusting each other, whatever the reasons are, I'm not again here to litigate the reasons. I'm here to litigate the diagnosis of the problem. We got to make those people better. And here's the hope. Last summer, I drove from Austin to Boston. I did not pick those two towns to make it rhyme. Austin, Texas, in the middle of the country. Boston's where my family lives.
It's a happy coincidence.
And it's a happy coincidence. And I drove from Austin to Houston to Lake Charles, Louisiana, New Orleans, Selma, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, Atlanta, Georgia, Savannah, Asheville, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and then finally up to Boston. And I met maybe 3 people that said that we should not have dialogues and conversations with people that we disagree with. People want this. Last March, I was on a 16-day, 10-city tour from Minnesota to D.C. We went to 10 different campuses. Almost every young person said 2 things. One is that they're living in a moment of fear and apathy, and they don't want to engage because they're scared to say what's on their mind, which is a terrible prospect for a democracy. And 2 is that we just need to get along. People want this. The latent demand for our work and for this theory of change is tremendous. The problem is that the loudest voices in our politics are on those temperamental extremes.
Yeah.
And as a result, when you're a young person or you're an adult and you're in a community, whoever's got the loudest voice, well, either you engage with that voice or you disengage. And that's the problem that we're seeing. We've got about 7% of Americans on both sides engaging in a hyperactive way, and we've got the other 43% completely disengaging.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it seems.
Sorry, we went from firefighters to disengagement and apathy.
No.
Apologies.
It's a perfect it's a perfect sequence. I think.
Yeah.
Well, in part just because I guess there's a way in which we are figuring out, like, okay, how do we light a fire in order to sort of get people, galvanized around something that's not a policy focused kind of effort, right? I mean, just to your point, we're trying to sort of shift the way people think about things, right? But, part of that also calls upon us to put out fires. And so, from my vantage point, so much of, where the work kind of, comes in is in giving people a deeper sort of understanding of how it is they arrive at their certain perspectives on the world, right? There's a lot to be said about your average, I think, sort of working class white Trump voter in Appalachia or the Rust Belt, in terms of how it is they have been economically marginalized over time, culturally isolated from mainstream American society in a way that makes them feel condescended to by this sort of, liberal elites that set the tone and tenor in our universities and in the entertainment industry, et cetera. Just like there's so much to be said about inner city African Americans and Latinos who've lived in a country where, however your sort of, racial politics may tend to lean, so to speak, I think it's largely inarguable that you've gone from in different contexts in the black context, from slavery to segregation, but also to the ghettoization of people coming in as immigrants or who are the descendants of slaves into poor communities where they have less access to equitable educational systems, less access to equitable health care, greater proximity to violence, and therefore the trauma that comes with having to go to school after hearing gunshots go off in your neighborhood the night before and having to worry about actually surviving the next day while also passing a test. These are reasons not to believe in the American dream for many people.
Yeah.
And it's just to say that these are human stories.
And it makes people, I think you said this earlier today, it turns the narrative of American exceptionalism into American hypocrisy.
Right, exactly. And so, in that sense, I mean, look, for people who voted for many people who voted for Donald Trump, I mean, there's exactly this sort of parallel sort of idea. Now they may say, like, the idea of making America great again implies that America has not been great for some time. And for many people who voted for Donald Trump, without going through the sort of, who's more oppressed kind of calculation of that sometimes we want to sort of get into on these subjects, for people whose attention is rightly focused on their own lives, because that is the way we should be on some level, right? We should be concerned with our own households, our own families, our own communities, not at the exclusion of a larger common concern, but that's certainly where our concerns begin. For people who feel like their lives have not moved forward over a certain period of time, it's understandable that they look to somebody who says, "Hey, out of all of these people, in the Republican establishment, the Hollywood establishment, liberal elites, and so on and so forth, who are looking their noses down on you, not speaking your language because they don't share your concerns, I'm not like them. I love you. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to represent you." Of course, people are going to gravitate towards that, right? And so for people who would say that, whether it's how you relate to the MAGA movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, that the way to deal with people who are embracing a populist sort of assertiveness in their politics, which is polarizing, but coming from a place of social isolation and rejection, right? To say that the way to deal with those people is to isolate them and reject them further by not talking to them, by not trying to humanize them, by not understanding the experiences that are leading them to be outraged against the system, it is to argue for a perpetuation of the very problem that, people on the right and left say that they want to get beyond, right? Which is, moving to a place to where those people are no longer destroying our democracy by voting for the people who they're voting for and acting the way that they act. It seems to me that understanding for the human experiences that lead people to their politics has got to be indispensable to this work. And I'm wondering, what role for that intercultural understanding, you sort of see in the work itself.
So I want to try and pull apart two things there. The first is, I think, what you aptly described, what MAGA, Make America Great Again, Donald Trump are actually all about, which is not policy, but community, identity. It's about community and identity. Why does a Trump voter in New Jersey fly a Trump flag on his or her boat? It has nothing to do with the policies that Donald Trump has passed, and it has everything to do with what he represents, which is speaking to their values, but more importantly, speaking to a sense of alienation. So first, I want to pull apart that point about community. The second thing that I want to pull apart is the inevitable critique that I want to address of why we need to potentially humanize people that might deny our existence. Because that is the argument for why we should not be in conversation with someone that might be racist. Why we should not be in a conversation with someone that deeply believes that where you're coming from is not a place for us to be.
Yeah, particularly for many people on the left.
Exactly. And it's understandable. So let me pull that second one apart first. I understand why a black kid in the inner city does not want to have a conversation with a white man in Kansas when that black kid has been factually beaten down generation after generation with poverty and generational pain. But I will not give their white ally a free card to go on Twitter and demonize that man from Kansas.
Okay.
It is up to their ally, the white person, the white liberal, to step up and recognize that someone has to hold and acknowledge and engage. I understand why a gay kid does not have to be in conversation with someone that denies their existence. And it's not up to me to demand that. But their straight friends don't get a free card. Their straight friends do not get a free card.
Right.
We are passing and bucking accountability. Because if you believe in the notion of democracy, if you believe in the moral arc of progress, the excusing of someone's politics to get them to a place of common understanding is not defensive, it's a survival strategy. And that's how you stitch a country together. So that's that second point that I want to address first, which is, well, why should we talk to someone? Not all of us have to, but right now no one is.
Right.
The first piece that you said about community and identity, let me tell you what I think is our community. And I'm curious how you would define the bridge community, not just BridgeUSA, Bravery, just the notion of bridge building.
Right.
Here's how I think about our community. It is not about Trump, Biden. It is not about Democrat, Republican. It is not about liberal, conservative. It is about whether you're open-minded or closed-minded. It is whether you are empathetic or exclusive. It is whether you believe in creating spaces that allow everyone to speak up or creating spaces that shut people out.
Right.
If you're on the side of empathy, open-mindedness, and understanding, this is the community for you. And that is most Americans, because that is a battle of temperament that all of us want to be winning. I will end with this. 4 weeks ago, you keynoted. John Wood Jr. gave an amazing keynote at the BridgeUSA Summit, followed by Monica Guzman, who's another Braver Angels. There's basically these Braver Angels black cats running around the BridgeUSA franchise. And they just kind of find themselves in company with us. What could I say? They just want to be young. So
that's what it is. We're living vicariously through you guys. Try to reclaim our forgotten youth.
Exact. No, it's all right. John and Monica spoke at the conference, and we had about 120 students from all 51 of our chapters, 2 students from each chapter. And man, I mean, you saw that community we had trans students there, we had gay students there, we had African-American students there.
And involved in a Brave Angels debate, of course,
involved
chaired by
April Lawson.
April Lawson.
Cornfield. But yes, April Cornfield, Doug Spry, ACTA, Luke Nathan Phillips. That community has gay kids, trans kids, African-American students, Latinx students, and it's got conservative students from Louisiana, and it's got conservative students from Texas. So I asked myself afterwards, why are they all here?
Right.
College kids are giving up 2 days of their week, 2 weeks before finals. And we talked about this. They're here because the battle is no longer left-right. The battle is about temperament. You are either hyper engaged and exclusive, or you're here because you want to listen and engage. And so that's the community we got to build. It's what the most powerful leaders in the history of this democracy have done, which is that they've always recognized what it's all about.
Right.
It is about community, group, and wanting to feel like you belong. So our job is, what is the largest tent that we can create where the most amount of people feel belong, so that you can really attest to Barack Obama's statement, there are no blue states or red states, just the United States.
Yeah. I think that you really named it, and I'm very glad that you crystallized it in that way. That the thing that we have in common is that we seek to empathize, we seek to build inclusive spaces, whether we are deeply conservative or deeply progressive or somewhere in the middle. And we are all of those things. But I think that we ultimately equate the work of democracy and the nature of a republic that is made up of different constituent parts, right? From its very beginning, the different states had very different characters, very different cultures. Virginia and New York were not alike, particularly, and yet that this is the nature of the society that we want to live in, both perhaps as an intrinsic matter, because there is sort of things to be learned and joys to be had by engaging with people who are different from you, but also as a sheer practical matter of survival, because we can't have a free society without those sorts of spaces.
Yeah.
You talked about, understanding the resistance of, the inner city black kid talking with the, Trump voter in Kansas, but you don't want to give an excuse to the white ally. And I totally appreciate that point. I do have, myself sometimes a somewhat parallel kind of point that I make, to the black inner city kid, which basically says that, these sorts of conversations can be hard. Remember that in his time, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, the nonviolent movement. These are people who marched across bridges, being hosed down and bitten by dogs and physically abused by people who are virulent racists and who are also willing to talk to white people, as King often did, who did not believe in racial equality. He did so with love and goodwill in a way that ultimately allowed him to reach those folks. And that's a lesson that's available for black and white, left and right in today's time. And so, even for folks who feel themselves to be on the marginalized end of American society or ends of American society, I still elevate that example. But, it's also worth emphasizing the fact that, you know, this sort of activity, not to equate us to the people on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but it's just to say that even the simple act of engaging in a good faith sort of conversation with somebody whose points of view are deeply disturbing to you,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, um, that there is difficulty in that, and
Yes.
therefore this work isn't necessarily for everyone. I do agree with Monica Guzman when she makes the point that she thinks that a willingness to move in this direction would be good for everyone. But I would also say that there are some among us who, whether by virtue of our material circumstances, our natural temperaments, our basic level of familiarity and exposure to people of differing points of view, differing political and cultural backgrounds, are perhaps better positioned than others to be able to do this sort of work. For those of us for whom we find ourselves in a position to more effectively be able to get engaged in these sort of bridge building and bridge
Mm-hmm.
crossing conversations and organizing, I really do think that we have a moral and a practical imperative to do so. Um,
And can I
mm,
make this? I want to add some tangible context to that, because
yeah,
John does this thing where he makes me sound like an idiot in the abstract, and
not
then
at
I
all.
will bring up some stories in the concrete.
not
So
not at all.
so
I'm just
so
trying to keep up.
no. So tangibly on a college campus, it's one of the most diverse places that you can go. Now, it might not be actually as economically diverse, but it is certainly diverse in terms of identity.
Mm,
Um, for those of you that don't know, BridgeUSA, we basically have these college chapters. The reason why this is relevant is because our chapters focus on small student discussions, 5 to 6 young people, anywhere from 5 to 6 to 30. And your question and your point about having these diverse perspectives uh, involved, that, as Monica Guzman would say, that it's a courageous act to actually converse. When we bring these students in, we do have to do a lot of work to build trust,
right.
where that African American student union leader and the Latinx student union leader and the white kid from a fraternity,
Mm,
all have the level of trust where they know that they're entering a community that is truly, to your point, inclusive. Not in the progressive leftist sense, but inclusive
right.
in terms of the actual word,
Right.
inclusive.
Mm,
So I think part of the challenge that our work always faces is that it can often sometimes sound like something that people that are elite can encourage those that are marginalized to participate in.
mm,
And so I think what we have to do is show stories, show examples, demonstrate that when you create trust, that when you show up to this space, that act of conversing and sharing your vulnerable story with someone else who also has a vulnerable story,
mm,
that act of common understanding is
right.
powerful.
Mm, right.
It's powerful. And so your point about, like, you know, we're not the folks on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, not at all. First of all, we shouldn't even be comparing movements. We shouldn't be comparing experiences, oppression, etc. But what we can compare is courage.
Mm,
The reason why what we're doing is one of the most courageous things, and those that are part of Braver Angels community are part of an incredibly courageous community, is because you that's listening, for you to make the most amount of friends and to get the most amount of Twitter likes, and for you to engage the most amount of elite folks,
mm,
go be on the far right or the far left.
yeah.
It is socially advantageous, and it is to your social credibility
Mm.
for you to not be in this community.
Jeez.
So we're all
Yeah,
just friendless, sad normies. But like that is a demonstration.
yeah.
We're fighting a mountain. So when people say this is some hokey pokey bullshit, the answer to that is, well, if that's really the case, then how come everyone hates us? How come everyone that is threatened because their
Mhm.
power will be displaced
Mm,
when this community wins?
mm,
That's how you know you're doing something right and courageous.
mm. Okay, so let's keep going in that
Sorry, I know
direction.
there's a lot there.
No, 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 no.
Yeah.
This is perfect. And look, our space is evolving.
Yeah.
Bridge and Braver. I mean, we've done a lot of good work. I think we have communities, activists, people who represent the very best in America from all sorts of directions, who've done extraordinary things in organizing communities, organizing campuses in relationship. And now, for instance, through Braver Politics, this initiative that we've launched to engage elected officials at every level of government. So we've got our workshops rolling out in Congress and the House of Representatives, but also in state legislators, municipalities, school boards across the country, mobilizing volunteers to get political candidates to engage in a different kind of way. We're now sort of moving towards structural engagement with America's prevailing democratic institutions. And this very podcast is sort of a small example of us trying to do that in the digital media space and so forth. But you seem to just say something that really puts a fine point on it. You said that when we win, that the power bases will that are threatened by that are held by people who hold us in contempt now, perhaps, right? Because I suppose you're saying that they see that, or they sense that, or they feel that, and
Or
yet,
that their power depends on division.
right now, I think that we do get a lot of love from a wide spectrum of people, and I think that at this moment, the more dire kind of problem is that you'll have people just sort of ignoring what we do. And I think I've heard you say that part of the problem with the larger bridge building universe, beyond just Braver Angels and Bridge USA, but there are many extraordinary groups and leaders in this space. But that part of the problem is that we are so, because we're trying to show people how not to be lost in identity based conflict, that we become too averse to conflict ourselves. Now, I will tell you that in this work, I actually do believe that Braver Angels, the community and the movement it represents, ought to see itself as at the vanguard of a larger movement that does seek, in some sense, to sort of shift the balance of power in American society, not from right to left or left to right, but towards what I sort of refer to as the temperamental center, and that you sort of gave us some of your language for sort of understanding, right? It is conservatives and liberals, progressives and libertarians, and so forth, who are willing to be sort of inclusive and empathetic, who I would like to see being the cultural powerhouses within our institutions and so forth. And in that sense, we are taking our own stand, to seek, seeking power or power of a kind. Should we embrace that though more consciously? And if we should, does that require us to be in a way more confrontational ourselves in identifying and naming, the parties, institutions, perhaps the individual personalities who may presently be toxicifying the discourse? Um, I could go further, but I think maybe I'll leave it at that. Is this something that if we're going to go the next step in this work, we have to wrestle with? Being willing to leaning into confrontation of a kind.
The problem thus far with the bridging space is that the people that we are actively competing with,
Mhm.
and there's a stronger word I could use there, but
Right.
let's say it's competition with,
Mm.
uh, should have played football,
Mhm.
and we came to play soccer.
Okay. Mhm.
They are operating on a different set of rules.
Mhm.
And most of our major institutions have conformed to their endpoint.
Mhm.
Here's what I mean by that. Social media, every algorithm, every incentive is geared towards intensifying engagement.
Right.
In our electoral institutions, every layer of that institution, from the primary system to the way we vote, is geared towards making sure that the loudest voices in our politics are being heard.
Mm.
The problem right now, in my opinion, is that there is no incentive to be a bridge builder.
Mm.
There's no political incentive, nor is there any social incentive.
Mm.
There isn't. Right now, if I wanted to make the most amount of friends on a college campus, I sit outside with a table, talk about whether it's defund the police or a more conservative line, which is, all lives matter,
Mhm.
and I will instantly have my crowd.
Right.
On a political side, If you're an elected official, and I'm sure you do as well, John, and I've learned this from you, to actually talk to those people in power, they'll always say something like, this is the only way I can engage.
Mhm.
Because those that will show up to vote are the most passionate and they're the most temperamentally extreme.
Right.
So the question to me becomes very simple. How do you shift the incentives in society for it to be both to your civic and political advantage to be a bridge builder? That's the problem set that I'm wrestling with.
Mhm.
On the political side, I think it requires some institutional reforms. That's why I think that there's a whole democracy reform movement that complements the work that bridge building is doing.
Mhm.
Someone like Andrew Yang, who's an ally, is focused on a
Yeah.
lot of that work.
Mhm.
You need that. On the civic and societal sense, the question of should we be embracing confrontation to shift the incentives is even more pronounced. And rather than offering a yes or no answer, because I'm a classic bridge builder with a temperament that's squishy, I would say
Right.
that people are looking for change, people are looking actively for leadership, and people are actively looking for community. And communities have boundaries.
Mm.
Leaders have sharp edges.
Yeah.
Ideas are definitionally opposed to other ideas. That's why they're ideas.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to tell you yes or no. I'm just going to outline how historically people have amalgamated around certain ideas and certain notions in certain communities. The reason why I don't think that it is necessarily contradictory to be confrontational about the work of bridging while embracing the principles of open-mindedness is because our community is built on those principles.
Mm.
Theoretically, our community can get 100% participation of the American people.
Mm. Right.
To be not in our community is not our act of exclusion. It is their act of not choosing to be in it.
Mm. Mm. Okay. Yes. So you've answered the question that I was going to follow up with, right?
Mhm.
Which is, how can we in any way sort of, draw a line and say that, this is what we stand for, and we are willing to do so in a way that frontally opposes the opposite, right? Without falling prey to the very sort of tribal polarization that we are here to address, right? And I think that you just named it. Theoretically, what we do can include everybody. There's nobody who's definitionally excluded from what it is
You're
we're
welcome
doing
in our community.
beyond, at least not on the basis of anything that you may believe politically. Now, you may politically believe in sort of, the reestablishment of slavery or something like that. But if you believed in the reestablishment of slavery, you're also probably not willing to sit
You're
down
not
and
going
have
to
a
find
good
our
faith.
community. Do you know
You're also
how
probably
many
not-
times, John, I get the answer a question on college campuses? So, should we be talking to Nazis on campus?
Mm.
And I'll say, before I answer that question, let me tell you one thing. In the last 5 years, I've not had a single Nazi show up to a bridge discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not going to come to this community.
Yeah, swastikas on the forearms.
No, I'm sorry.
And so forth.
They're not coming to this community.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look. Now there's a range of viewpoints within the bridge, building kind of space. Because this hypothetical comes
Absolutely.
up,
And we don't speak for the entire space.
We don't.
Yeah,
We don't. This
we
is
speak
just,
for
this
our
is-
respective organizations.
Well, right, and even at that, there's a range of views within Brave Angels. I think that in general.
Are you telling me not everyone just listens to what John Wood Jr. is saying?
It's disappointing. I know, but even Brave Angels folks might disagree with something I have to say.
It's okay.
But I will say that for myself, I mean, I am kind of an extremist on this inclusivity front, as long as the good faith element is there. I don't recall us ever having anybody walking into a Brave Angels meeting with swastikas on their forearm, But if a person walked into a Brave Angels workshop and said, hey, I don't think that, African Americans are equal to white people in terms of their potential and their abilities or their character or what have you. But if such a person walked into the room and wanted to have the conversation in an earnest kind of way, I myself would, Now, I wouldn't necessarily demand that of everybody else with me because, again, is recognizing the fact that certain steps, certain conversations are hard. And I'm giving a very extreme example. I don't even think it's happened, right? But the reason I put it on the table is just to say that I really do believe that human beings can be reached. Daryl Davis, who I don't know if you know him personally, but I know you know of his work, and people listening to me right now, many of you will be familiar with his story. But for those who aren't, Daryl Davis is a black man who persuaded I think probably no less than 150 or 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan to literally hang up their hoods, right? As a matter of fact, he's got their hoods in his own closet because they put down their racist garb and stepped away from the Klan as a direct consequence of the fact that over a sustained period of time, Daryl Davis, black jazz musician, was willing to just engage them in conversation in ways that allowed them to fully unearth why it is they had the points of view that they had, and then proceeded to give them a different perspective while modeling a commitment to recognizing their dignity, their humanity, in ways that they never would have expected to get, not just from somebody who disagreed with them in general, but from a black man in particular. And in so doing, he showed them that their views were wrong in a way that they could understand, internalize, and it changed them, right? Now, Daryl, he could have said that as a matter of principle, I won't talk to you because your dehumanization of me shows me that you're not someone to humanize. And you know what? Yes, absolutely, that'd be understandable, right? You could absolutely understand, why a person how a person could say, I'm not going to be like Daryl Davis. And yet, Daryl didn't make that choice. And you've got hundreds fewer racists in the country as a direct result of it, And so this is the reason to do what we do. I mean, in all directions, having some faith in the idea that through relationships, we can, one, change each other, two, establish the context of trust whereby we can operate the mechanisms of society to everyone's benefit, right? And to do that maximally well, I don't think that you can draw lines on the basis of political identity.
I think that's right. And I'll tell you how I sort of square this question, because I think fundamentally what you're asking is, should you, and this goes to the fact that the diversity within the bridge building field is very stark on this, but what is the extent, or where's the line that you draw where you can have a conversation with someone, right? I am incredibly enamored by the work that Daryl Davis has done.
Yeah.
And yet the way that I square this is I'm not necessarily in the business of telling other African-American folks to be Daryl Davis.
Sure.
But in my person self, I'm ready to have a conversation with anyone.
Right.
Because I have integrity in what I believe. I know why I'm here. And more importantly, my job is to build understanding this country. And so the way that I've sort of balanced that question is it goes back to my comment about allies. As a white liberal, you are not threatened speaking to someone that deeply believes in wrong and racist beliefs. In fact, I would argue that the definition of being anti-racist, in Ibram Kendi's words, is one that is focused on outcome-based communication. This is what we need to be doing in the bridge building space, is taking the most prominent ideologies that have been used by people to divide and demonstrate that they actually can exist in complement with our work. The notion of outcome-based policies, where you measure whether or not you've decreased certain problems in our society, something that Ibram X. Kendi would argue, that notion, if you apply that to a conversation, it is up to the ally to engage. So I will never be in the business of telling another black man or another black woman or someone that has been targeted in certain ways, or whether they're a member of the LGBTQ community, but I'm always in the business of telling their allies. And importantly, I'm in the business of making it so that the norm is for us to think first about talking rather than disengaging. The last thing I'll just say, John, and I don't know what our time is right now, but I think that we're living at a moment where everyone's sense of self-importance is substantially inflated.
Yeah, right. I know mine is.
Yeah, I mean, I that's why we're on a podcast, where we think that we ought to be listened to.
Right, exactly.
I was born in the United States in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I then lived in India from the age of 0 to 5 with both sets of grandparents while my parents worked in the U.S., so I didn't live with them. Then after that, when I came back to the States, I moved every 2 years until I got to high school. The only way that I made it through that period of life where there's constant adaptation, constant movement, constant recognition of the fact that this brown-looking, Indian accented, matte-haired boy is going to fit in, is for me to be ready to excuse someone else's ignorance so that they could accept me.
Right.
And that is where this comes full circle, is that our work is not only a theory of change, but it is a survival strategy that has helped the most marginalized folks not only necessarily ingrain in society, but actually change society for the better.
Mm.
And that connects to the 1619 Project. You ready? I'm drawing all these lines.
Yeah, go for it.
The 1619 Project and Nicole Hannah-Jones's work, and Nicole Hannah-Jones talks about this a lot. Her first essay on democracy starts with patriotism and it ends with patriotism. She starts with the story that her black father flew the American flag in his front yard,
Right.
and she never understood why he did that. And then it ends with this notion that actually the reason why he did that was because black Americans are the most patriotic because their struggle is what has pushed this country to realize those ideals. And the problem is that we're not ready to accept that progress. Putting that aside for a second, just taking that story of patriotism, she took the word patriotism and brought it to the black struggle so that African American folks could also see them in the American story. Our job is to build a community and identity, to sacrifice our senses of self-importance so that other people, those especially that are marginalized, can see themselves in this community. And there's a lot of demand for it.
Right. Indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. Manu Meel, CEO of BridgeUSA, my brother in the struggle.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. John, I don't need to say this, but I'm only as good as the people around me and only as good as the people that have mentored me. And we've only known each other really for about 6 months through Luke Nathan Phillips, our mutual friend. And
all the credit goes back to Luke.
I just have to say that the level of humility, but also poise and eloquence that you operate with is truly an inspiration. So John Wood Jr. is officially an old young person. No, young old person. Sorry.
There you go. I think everybody knows that. But yeah, man, I appreciate you, and it's remarkable how much we all have to learn from someone so young. And I look forward to doing more. And so, folks, for those of you who see the value in this work, who see the importance of building the bonds that can tie us together so that we may uphold a democracy that works not just for us today, but for our children and grandchildren tomorrow, I invite you to get involved. Join us as a member at braverangels.org, or if you're active on a college campus, if you're a student, check out BridgeUSA as a vehicle for having the conversations that can heal our democracy. You'll find links in the description below, and also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. As ever, we are building a house united. Until next time.